Welcome to the motherfucking We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this, our continued coverage of all this past weekend's action. We move over to the Top Rank show.
Took place after the Ring of Fire, after the undisputed heavyweight title fight. We turn our attention to the welterweight division.
In what was a battle of the unbeatens, then unbeaten Giovani Santillian, reigning WBO interim champion, in the most position to eventually fight for the full WBO title, and unbeaten, little-known Brian Norman,
who gave Giovani a taste of his own medicine, mid-range to inside. What Giovani Santillian did to Alexis Rocha, Brian Norman did to Giovani Santillian.
Turned the tables on him in his own hometown. In a nutshell, Giovani tried to do to Brian what he did to Alexis, and with Brian it didn't work, because Brian had a bit of size.
Was immediately apparent.
Was a bit bigger than Giovani Santillian. Stronger too, stronger in the pocket, stronger in the clinch, stronger mid-range to inside. Giovani tried his best to bully him, to crowd him, to let go of punches within close quarters, and all that did was get him countered over and over.
Tried to back him off, tried to push him around, beat him from the inside out, and ended up getting beaten from the inside out himself. Those uppercuts right up the middle. You have to give Brian Norman a lot of credit for throwing the right punches at the right time to the right places.
Brian Norman, 26-0 with 20 KOs, unbeaten, only 23 years old, and a breath of fresh air to what seemed like a welterweight division that was dying on a vine. Not much in terms of new talent, new faces, fresh ones. And what's exciting is, this loss doesn't have to be the end for Giovani Santillian. He can still be a major player at the weight, even though he lost his WBO interim status. He can still be in good fights, big ones, that he stands a legitimate chance of winning, and the same now applies to Brian Norman, who just had the right style.
I could go for Santillian versus Barrios, Santillian versus Stanionis, Santillian versus Conor Benn,
Gabriel Maestre, and the same now applies to Brian Norman.
What we learned.
Bully style's not going to go over well with a big, strong kid like Brian Norman. You don't just stand in front of this guy trying to crowd the pocket. If you do, he's going to make you pay for it like he made Giovani pay for it. So I'd give Brian very good odds to beat Mario Barrios, and that would be a very dangerous fight for Conor Benn, because he's an aggressive combination puncher too if he's not careful.
The same applies to Eimantas Stanionis.
These more aggressive fighters that like to go head-to-head, nose-to-nose, toe-to-toe with their opponents mid-range to inside, trying to overwhelm them with volume and aggression. Brian's catch-and-counter style is all wrong for those kinds of fighters.
A more even fight would be Brian Norman versus Jaron Ennis, because Jaron's has a little bit more flair, more bells and whistles, and more nuances than those aforementioned fighters. And I would give Jaron Ennis very good odds to beat them too.
Him versus Brian is a more even fight, though there is more work needs doing. Brian is very young, still has more growing and more developing to do, though currently he is in a pole position to either fight for the newly vacated WBO title or be elevated to full champion when the time comes.
When Crawford vacates,
very little remnants are left of the previous era, the previous cycle of welterweights. You know, Sean Porter retired, Keith Thurman might as well be retired, Danny Garcia moved up in weight, Terrence Crawford, he's moving up,
Errol's moving up too. If and when he comes back, it won't be at welterweight.
So this is a brand new crop, a brand new cycle of welterweights. You have to figure that some of those kids that are down there at 140, they're going to eventually make their way to 147 at some point, which will effectively alter the landscape.
Somebody's gonna have to deal with Brian.
Was a breath of fresh air in a welterweight division that needed new faces and new blood. Brian Norman made a splash, a big one yesterday, and the way he knocked out Giovani Santillian just stopped him with that vicious uppercut. He made a statement.
Knocking Giovani out in the 10th round, it was beautiful. The welterweight division has a new player, a new major player, and I look forward to seeing more of them.
We then come to the main event of that same card, the lightweight WBO title fight between Emmanuel Navarrete and Denis Berinchyk. And I knew this wasn't going to be easy for Emmanuel, because the last time I saw him move up in weight, up to super featherweight, that wasn't easy. So moving up to lightweight, I didn't figure that was going to be easy either. And I'd had a look at Denis Berinchyk, saw what he was capable of, and he's a solid fighter, very solid fighter.
Yeah.
What I was wrong about was that Emmanuel would get maximum consideration from Top Rank, from the judges.
I'm cynical.
That if the fight was close enough, that you could give it to either guy. They'd give it to Emmanuel because they've been working with him for a while. They have plans for him, and they'd ensure he secures that WBO title. They didn't. They gave the decision to Dennis.
It was a good day to be a Ukrainian. You got Usyk securing undisputed in Saudi, Dennis securing a WBO title here in the States.
Did he deserve the decision? I think he did. I think the fight was nip and tuck. I think the fight was a very awkward fight, a very messy fight, where you had two guys coming at each other from very unconventional angles, awkward angles, and it was hard to separate them.
Neither guy was having it all his way.
The awkward and unconventional style of Emmanuel Navarrete, who throws punches from very awkward angles at awkward times, and the fleet of foot Olympic style of Denis Berinchyk, a guy who was on the same Olympic team as Vasyl Lomachenko, Alexander Usyk, Alexander Gvozdyk.
One look at him in action and you could tell.
You could see that he comes from the same school of boxing as they do, that he's got the pivots like Lomachenko and the aggression of a Sergey Derevianchenko. He's that kind of fighter, 36 years old, now WBO champion.
A few thoughts.
I'm not crying Emmanuel a river, but I will say that I think he moved up in weight too soon. He only had about 3 fights as a super featherweight, and he was a noticeably fleshy super featherweight.
Even more fleshy at lightweight.
Spit tire in his midsection, man boobs. I mean, clearly he wasn't wearing the weight well, the added weight. It's not saying that one day he won't be able to make something happen at lightweight, because he has the physical dimensions to do it, to one day fill out, but fill out properly at 135 pounds. He just tried for it too soon.
Still WBO champion at 130.
He hasn't vacated the WBO title at 130 pounds. I don't know if the WBO themselves will allow him to hang on to it now that he's coming off a loss, but it might behoove him to go back down there, get his nutrition in order, his weight in order, and campaign a while longer at 130.
Oscar Valdez is WBO interim champion. I think that makes him Emmanuel's mandatory.
As one-sided as their initial meeting was, does anybody actually want to see a rematch, even if one is ordered by the WBO? Is that really a precedent to stage one from a fiscal perspective? I don't know.
Dennis is WBO lightweight champion now. There are 2 Ukrainian lightweight champions. One is Vasyl Lomachenko, IBF champion, and Dennis is the other.
I do not expect them to fight. I do not expect to see Vasyl Lomachenko take on Denis Berinchyk in a unification match. I don't even know that we're going to see Vasyl Lomachenko in the ring again, which is a separate matter.
But I don't think they're going to fight. They asked Denis Berinchyk who he would like to fight. I think he mentioned Keyshawn Davis, and he mentioned Shakur Stevenson. Shakur Stevenson seems more likely to me. Shakur, WBC champion.
Provided he doesn't burn that bridge with Top Rank with his boneheaded comments and baseless accusations, there's a unification match there for him with Denis Berinchyk. I think there is, if he wants it and he wises up.
Somebody needs to take that kid's phone.
That was my evaluation, my assessment ahead of the fight, that if Emmanuel wins the fight, they'll make a unification match between him and Loma. But if Dennis wins the fight, they'll make a unification match between him and Shakur. Dennis won the fight. He's WBO champion.
Here we are.
Dennis is an aggressive customer, a mid-range to inside fighter with very good footwork and foot placement, good movement.
Combinations.
Perhaps yesterday's fight was not the best example of that, because yesterday's fight, in what we saw, you had 2 guys coming at each other from very awkward angles, unconventional angles. The awkward style of Emmanuel Navarrete versus the Olympic style of Denis Berinchyk. Both these guys, they were moving a lot and trying for a lot of shots, missing punches.
It was messy.
Only occasionally getting in a solid shot on the other guy. And Top Rank has really got to do something for their fans, for the boxing fans on the East Coast, because their cards run a little bit too long, too late into the hour.
Was it about 12 midnight when the main event started?
People on the West Coast are likely not as inconvenienced as the people on the East, because they're 3 hours behind. So the cards don't go into the wee hours of the morning the way they do for the people on the East Coast. People on the East Coast are fighting sleep about as hard as these 2 guys are fighting each other, so you can imagine the inconvenience that poses. It was a good fight. It was an entertaining fight, though very messy, very uncoordinated.
These guys were all over the place.
But I expected a home-cooked decision. That's not what we got. Denis Berinchyk, for his efforts, got a lot more consideration than I thought they would give him. So congratulations to him, the newly crowned WBO lightweight champion. Men's heavyweight news. The continued fallout of this past weekend's heavyweight undisputed title fight the big action involving the big men, the people at Sky Sports, via their social media, showed an image of Tyson Fury leaving the ring, saying that he's the people's champion, the people's champ.
What?
Tyson Fury.
What people?
I know a good number of British boxing fans and British content creators that were waiting for Alexander Usyk to beat this guy because they were sick of him, sick of his smoke, sick of his mirrors, and sick of his bullshit. Sick of seeing him hold up undisputed because he's held it up more than once.
So to what people are the people at Sky Sports referring to? Because he's not the darling among the Brits the way they're trying to make it out to be.
You often hear me say that there is a place for tribalism in boxing, and there is a place for tribalism in all of organized sports. Backing the home team, or in this instance, the hometown fighter, that's what's putting the asses in the seats and selling the pay-per-views. That if you were backing Tyson Fury for no reason other than he's a British fighter, well, you can do that, but that means fuck all once the opening bell sounds.
There were some Americans backing him too.
Small minority, a substrata of American boxing fans that thought that Tyson Fury's the best thing since sliced bread for no reason other than he beat Deontay Wilder, because that's the real motivation behind it. That's why they backed him. They thought he beat the best guy around, the most monstrous puncher the division has ever seen.
Case in point.
Saw veteran boxing scribe from right here in the US of A, Mike Copinger, say, let's all remember to give respect to Tyson Fury. He lost tonight, but boy, has he elevated boxing in a big way.
No, he hasn't.
An international superstar who delivered a classic trilogy with Deontay Wilder.
They held undisputed up with that shit.
And another classic tonight versus Alexander Usyk, one of the greats.
Is that what you were saying when Usyk beat Anthony Joshua? Because as I recall, when Anthony lost to that same Alexander Usyk, you didn't take that time out for reflection to mull over all the contributions that Anthony made to the sport.
Mike Copinger claims that Tyson Fury elevated the sport, elevated the heavyweight division. No, he didn't. He beat Vladimir Klitschko in a stinker, then absconded because he was being investigated for doping. And after he beat Klitschko, nobody was saying that he was the best heavyweight the sport had ever seen. Not based on what he showed in the Klitschko fight.
You know who elevated the sport? Anthony Joshua, fighting that same Vladimir Klitschko. That's who elevated the sport. That's who brought the excitement and the interest back to the heavyweight division and heavyweight boxing.
The money. These background characters don't all of a sudden become interesting until Anthony Joshua comes into it, attempting to unify this division and become its undisputed champion. Both Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder were around for years. Years before Anthony Joshua went pro. They both debuted in 2008. Anthony don't even come into it until 2013.
And things really don't get exciting again, not all the way, until 2017. The monster numbers that Anthony brought in with Vladimir Klitschko, that's what elevated the heavyweight division, and that's right around the time Tyson Fury decides to come back.
Except he doesn't come back to fight Anthony Joshua, who was a unified champion in possession of 3 alphabet titles at the time. He comes back to fight Wilder. Wilder needed an alternative to Anthony,
And Fury figured Wilder was a safer choice.
they knew that Anthony was far too big a name for them to have their way in the boardroom with him, so they sought refuge in each other, and they fought each other.
3 times.
Was the trilogy entertaining? Yes, it was. But it's a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened to say that that's what elevated heavyweight boxing. No, it didn't.
That ain't even a reason fights started ending up in Saudi Arabia.
Interest to bring big-time boxing matches to that region of the world actually started with the Joshua versus Ruiz rematch.
Don't you think Fury deserves a little bit of credit for his contribution, adding to that scene, adding to the heavyweight picture?
I do. I think they all do. Usyk, AJ, Fury, Wilder.
Yeah.
I just can't help but notice how different the energy is when Usyk beat AJ, and now that Usyk's beaten Fury. Oh, now you want to reflect on the contributions made to the division and the sport?
They're always pulling punches on this guy. The reason they're pulling punches on this guy
Is because they're the ones that were wrong about him. You're the ones that put him on a pedestal. You're the ones that hyped him up. No, I don't think Fury's a bad fighter. He's not bad. He's a good fighter. He's elite. He's just not what you're making him out to be.
he never was.
You can be a good fighter, an excellent fighter, and an overrated fighter. 2 things can be true at the same time.
Was Fury good?
Yes.
But was him beating Deontay Wilder, was that blown out of proportion?
Absolutely. That's why I'm nauseated to see some people are still pulling punches on Tyson Fury when Mike Kopinger says that he elevated the sport. Elevated the sport? How'd he do that? By holding up Undisputed? Or getting sat on his ass by an MMA fighter? Embarrassing the boxing community.
What's supposed to be the premier heavyweight getting sat on his back pocket by a guy who never had a pro boxing match.
Fury contributed to the scene, he contributed to the sport, but he certainly didn't elevate it, and he created a lot of messes that other fighters had to come in and clean up.
When he absconded from the sport after the first Klitschko fight due to his doping case, his temporary retirement, and the belts were redistributed, who brought them back together?
Anthony Joshua, he unified the division.
He was the one pursuing Undisputed.
He loses the belts to Usyk. Usyk pursues Undisputed, while Fury's saying that Undisputed is not a priority to him. It's not his dream, and it never was. The only reason he was in there yesterday is because Turki Al-Sheikh paid him to do it. If not for Turkey and all that Saudi money, Fury wasn't interested in making that history or unifying this division. And he said so himself, so let's stop pulling punches on this guy. The truth is, he's not as good as you thought he was.
He's alright.
But you guys turned 2 victories over Deontay Wilder into Tyson Fury being the greatest heavyweight of all times.
That was bullshit.
How do you get he's the greatest of all times because he beat a one-handed fighter with no coordination, no cardio, 2 left feet, virtually no jab, no resume?
And the guy with the resume is the one you've been shitting on. Him and the guy that beat him, because it's not like you guys were falling over yourselves over Usyk either.
I said it a while ago, and I don't know if you guys caught it, that as far as I was concerned, the number 1 and number 2 heavyweights in the division, they already fought. They already fought 2 times. That was Anthony, and that was Usyk.
Wilder was never on AJ's level. Neither's Fury, and you'll find that out shortly.
So you got some Brits and some Mancunians backing the hometown fighter, backing Fury for obvious reasons, but you also had some Americans backing him for no reason other than he beat Wilder. But who the fuck is Wilder?
The fuck did he do?
The fuck did he beat that beating him all of a sudden made Fury the greatest heavyweight of all times?
You and your false idols.
On the heels of what is Tyson Fury's first recorded loss, his first professional loss on paper, because we all know he suffered one unofficially many years ago to John McDermott.
Try to act like that didn't happen.
I don't feel an overwhelming need to reflect upon Tyson Fury's contributions, least of all from those who propped him up, because that's not what you were saying when Usyk beat AJ. So don't start up with that shit now that he beat Fury.
Fury's overrated. I told you he was overrated.
Doesn't mean he's bad. I don't think he's bad. I just don't think he's everything you guys made him out to be. And you saw for yourselves yesterday. He's a bigger guy, longer guy, younger guy too. He outweighs Usyk by what, 43 pounds?
You're looking for a moral victory here? You're looking for a moral victory for him.
Hey, if nothing else, Tyson Fury made himself a lot of money convincing you guys that he's better than he actually is.
Congratulations.
Got all of you rubes under some kind of spell for some time.